Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, and as always, happy whatever day it is. Welcome to Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host. My name is Larry Erickson, and for the next half hour, almost half hour, I'm going to be rattling on about some things that I think you should know about and that hopefully you'll be interested in. As always, any comments, questions, reactions to the show are welcome. You can send them to me directly. This is my personal email, whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. And if you can catch that, you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be here a couple of times during the show. You can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather. If you do send me email, I have, as always, two requests. One is to please include something in the subject line to make it clear this is not spam, which, like you, I get way too much of. And the other is please be patient about getting an answer because I'm just really bad at answering email. So, all right, with that out of the way, let's get to it. I always like to start with some good news where I can. And this week I have some, I guess you call it partial good news, pretty good news, kind of good news. But it comes from an unexpected source, unexpected place, Syria. Now, as I'm doing this, on Wednesday, March, the 2nd, I believe, there is a partial ceasefire in Syria, which has been holding for several days now. It's tenuous and it's limited, but in the words of UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, it's holding by and large. Fighting is not completely stopped, but the level is far, far below what it had been. Now, I'm tempted to say, of course, each side accuses the other of any and all violations of the ceasefire. Asad al-Zubi, a senior official from Syria's main opposition group, said on February 29th that the truce was in danger of collapse because of attacks by government forces, while President Bashar al-Assad said he and his government have made every effort to maintain the peace in the face of violations by the other side, but there is a limit. Now, part of the problem in sorting out who is and who isn't responsible for any violations of the ceasefire is that the ceasefire doesn't apply to everyone. Jihadist groups such as ISIS and the Nusra Front, which have been responsible for some of the worst excesses of violence in the country, they can still be targeted. And Russia, at least, has made it very clear that it intends to continue bombing those targets. While at the same time, there is a question as to whether or not Russia, which is an ally of Assad, is actually restricting its bombing to those targets rather than also bombing some of Assad's opposition. Now, there are three main goals to the ceasefire, one of which is the ceasefire itself, just that there is a pause in the killing. Another specific point, another avowed point, is to allow aid convoys to get into rebel-held areas to bring relief to its estimated about 154,000 people living in these besieged areas. This aid includes food, water, sanitation supplies, medicine, as well as more mundane items like blankets, soap, and diapers. Now, that aid is getting through. Although, again, there are troubles. In this case, reports that some of Assad's forces are holding up these convoys and even claims that those soldiers are like dipping into the supplies to take some for themselves. Now, the other purpose of the ceasefire is to allow for the resumption of peace talks, which actually collapsed before they started last month because rebel groups said that they could not negotiate under continuing airstrikes. Now, these peace talks are set to begin in Geneva on March 9th. So that is the next big target date. The question is, will these talks actually start? Will they collapse before they begin? So let's just get to the start, okay? One thing at a time. We'll worry about keeping these talks going once we get them going. For now, let's just get everybody in the same building, if not in the same room even. In any event, there is, at least for now in Syria, a partial tenuous ceasefire. That may not sound like much, But in the face of what has gone on in that country over the past 5 years, that is good news. And there's a footnote to that, however, which is, don't worry. Remember, even if peace talks get started and the truce holds, our lovely little war against Daesh, which you may recall is a name for ISIS, another name for ISIS, which ISIS apparently hates, which for me is reason enough to use it. But our lovely little war against Daesh in Syria and Iraq will continue unabated, so we won't miss out on any fun. In point of fact, the U.S. has been building up its military forces in Iraq. Between January 2015 and January 2016, the number of soldiers there went from 2,300 to 3,700, an increase of just over 60%. Equally significant, the number of private forces acting under contract to the Pentagon went from 250 a year ago to over 2,000 now, an 8-fold increase in a single year. Now, such contractors may not be performing what are called security services. Most won't be. They'll be most likely performing logistical duties, such as construction, administration, and transportation. The double point here, however, is that their presence would ease the return for a rapid buildup of U.S. military forces in Iraq because an administrative and supply network would already be in place. And the other thing is that by performing duties that previously would have been done by soldiers, the net effect is to make the U.S. military footprint in Iraq look smaller than it actually is. I said it before, I'll say it again. Watch this space. Okay. Something on a related topic, something I'm going to be talking about. And I think as I go through this, I want you to be asking yourselves how much you knew about this, how much you heard about this. Had you heard, in fact, anything about this? Has any been mentioned, even obliquely, on the campaign trail by anyone on either side? 3 weeks ago, I reported to you that the Obama administration was drawing up plans for a new military intervention in Libya. The first one in 2011 was sold as a humanitarian effort to protect Libyan civilians, but was actually just a cover for assisting in the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi. That effort was strongly endorsed by Hillary Clinton. Indeed, a major New York Times two-part story shows how she was the major factor in convincing Obama to go ahead with this, up to and including arming favored opposition groups. That plan went so well that after Gaddafi was killed, Libya descended into the chaos of a multi-sided civil war which has killed thousands and refugeed hundreds of thousands, and from which it has still not emerged. In the immortal words of Rick Perry, oops. Oh, but it's different this time. This time we're not talking about protecting civilians or any of that nonsense. This is about opening a new front in the fight against ISIS, by taking decisive military action, quote unquote, against some groups in Libya laying claim to the name. Now, I also said those 3 weeks ago that this is being planned without any debate in Congress, without any remotely plausible claims to legal authority, and without regard to the fact that it was Barack Obama himself who said in 2007 that, quoting, "The president does not have the power under the Constitution to unilaterally authorize a military attack in a situation that does not involve stopping an actual or imminent threat to the nation." And it's also being planned without, it seems, any consideration about how similar decisive actions have led only to deepening U.S. military involvement in Iraq and Syria, with boots on the ground in both places playing an increasingly hands-on role. Okay, that was 3 weeks ago. What you need to know now is that our Nobel Peace Prize president, Generalissimo Hopi Chang'i, has acted on those plans, bombing an ISIS-controlled area in western Libya, killing some 40 people, including 2 hostages. This is being done, or was done, still without any congressional debate, much less authorization, but with the open acknowledgement that there may well be more such attacks. Top military officials, such as General Donald Bolduc, who's the commander of U.S. Special Operations Forces in Africa, are saying that Daesh is already too strong in Libya to be rolled back without active U.S. military action. Not only, by the way, was this bombing done without the approval of Congress, it was done without the approval or even knowledge of the only recognized government in Libya, which described it as, quoting, a clear and flagrant violation of sovereignty of the Libyan state. But there's even more. The U.S. military has also deployed special operations forces in Libya, boots on the ground, to give aid and training to, you guessed it, favored militias. Assuming, as we did in Iraq and as we are now doing in Syria, to such great success that we can pick out the good guys who will fight Daesh for us from the bad guys who won't. Remember the classic definition of insanity? All right, now something else here. To understand this, something else you need to understand. I referred just before to the only recognized government in Libya. I do that because there are three forces, each of which claims to be the legitimate government. One, the recognized one, was elected, or at least came in through an election, even if it was one marked by such threats and violence that voting didn't even take place in some parts of the country and ultimately produced a turnout of about 18%. Thing is, after that election, a group of Islamist parties, which did poorly, gaining only 30 of the 200 seats in the legislature, which is called the Council of Deputies, by the way, those parties staged a coup, forcing the new government to flee from the capital of Tripoli to a city in the west called Tobruk. The Libyan Supreme Court, still in Tripoli, remember, annulled the election as unconstitutional, which gave the Islamist parties a basis for saying that they are the legitimate government of Libya rather than the one set in Tobruk, even though the one in Tobruk is the one that still is internationally recognized. To make this even more complicated, in January, the UN Security Council recognized, or more accurately, created a third government, which is really just a means to push for the other two governments to join that third government in a big national unity government. And to give you an idea of the state that Libya is now in, this third government is based in Tunisia, because it would be too dangerous to try to stage it in Libya itself. And what's our answer to this cluster, and you know the rest of the term, of social and political and economic chaos? Our answer is more bombs, more boots on the ground, more trying to pick out the militias with the white hats from the militias with the black hats, more, ever more. And I have to be fair here about something. I do. It is not just the U.S. The UK has also sent special forces to Libya, working with the U.S. to aid those selected local militias. And once more, French special forces, some of whom have been openly operating on the front lines, were already there. And the thing is, this may be just the beginning. That new UN-created government is designed to be able to provide a pretext for deeper, broader military involvement by inviting or requesting such a wider war. Because after all, as U.S. Secretary of War Ashton Carter says, he's certain they will want help. The U.S., the UK, France, and Italy have all promised to expand their military campaigns against Daesh in Libya if that national unity government is ever created, failing which some fig leaf excuse can always be found, even assuming our various generalissimos even feel the need for one. The bottom line here for us as Americans. In 2015, the United States dropped nearly 24,000 bombs on 6 nations, every one of them majority Muslim. We are now waging bombing and drone campaigns in 7 nations that we, the public, know of: Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and now Libya. And it never seems to occur to us that what we're doing isn't working. It isn't making us more secure. It's making the lives of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in those other countries less secure. Lives which it appears we only care about as some metric in a war that shows no signs of ending or in fact doing anything other than continually increasing. A war that has turned even those with humane instincts, and I will say I include Barack Obama under that number, it's turned even those with humane instincts cold and aloof in matters of war and death, life and peace, safety and destruction, where bombing runs are just another errand, just another everyday chore to be done. And I actually say I include Barack Obama in those people as well. Indeed, when that report came out about the plans for a renewed bombing campaign in Libya, the one I talked about 3 weeks ago, the White House pointed out in a daily press briefing that it has actually already carried out airstrikes in Libya since the 2011 war. So, the attitude was, what's the big deal? The big deal is the hardening of the soul that this demonstrates, the ossification of the spirit that enables someone to present bombing another nation as a minor, almost routine matter, that enables someone to forget that what lies on the other end of that minor matter is shredded limbs and shattered lives, the remnants of what moments before were living, breathing human beings. But comes the response, they are the enemy. They want to kill us. They're monsters, cruel, unrelenting, unforgiving. Which, for some portion of those that we destroy, is certainly true. Fanaticism always gives rise to brutalities in whatever form it arises, with ultimately only the justification, not the brutalities themselves, varying one to the next. So yes, terrorism, or more importantly, and the distinction is different, the ideologies that drive terrorism must be resisted. The question is not if, but how. And the undeniable fact is what we're doing hasn't worked. It isn't working. It won't work until we realize that we keep thinking of terrorism, of driven fanaticism, as a matter of people rather than a matter of ideology, a matter of an idea. And you can't bomb an idea into submission unless you're prepared to essentially commit genocide. We have been told so many times in so many ways that the fight against terrorism will be an extended campaign, and that's likely true. But the truth is that our best targets for attack in this extended campaign are not the actual terrorists who number in the thousands, but the tens of thousands, the millions among who they recruit and from who they draw their strength. Our best weapons are bread and butter, not bombs. Our best tactic, reconstruction, not retaliation. Our best strategy, justice, not jingoism. The best way to minimize the threat of terrorism against us and against all others is to ensure that the dispossessed and the spiritually seeking have a genuine stake in the world, and that they don't see us as invaders or as grasping bullies. And the best way to not be seen as an invader or a grasping bully is to not be one. And the fact is that I said pretty much that same thing in pretty much those same words in an op-ed I wrote in the weeks after 9/11. In the ensuing more than 14 years, I have been given no reason to change my mind. We're taking a break. And we are back. To start the rest of the show, we have an RIP this week, but it's not for a person, it's for an organization. After less than 3 years, Al-Jazeera America, weighed down by knee-jerk Islamophobia among both viewers and advertisers, and weighed down by cable corporations that pushed it into higher, more expensive tiers while littering their basic levels with shopping channels and a tsunami of scripted reality shows, Al-Jazeera America has given up the ghost. Its website will no longer be updated, and its cable TV operations will shut down next month. What most Americans didn't and still don't, and actually never had the chance to find out, is that Al Jazeera is actually an internationally respected news organization whose American channel won 2 Peabody Awards in its first year of operation. Despite being owned by the government of Qatar, its international coverage was as fair and as broad as can be found at, for example, the BBC, and far superior to that of the American commercial networks. And if it brought an Arab slant on the world in the same way that the BBC or the French press agency bring a European slant on the world, well, that was a feature, not a bug. Al Jazeera itself is still in operation, its website featuring news reports and streaming video. But Al Jazeera America, very soon, will not be. So, R.I.P. Al Jazeera America. All right, next up, one of our regular features. This is the Clown Award, given for meritorious stupidity. I had several contenders this week. It was that kind of week. For example, we had U.S. District Judge Mark Carney of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, who ruled that citizens do not have the right, quote, to observe and record police officers absent some other expressive conduct, specifically without any stated purpose of being critical of the government. That is, in effect, unless you're recording cops for the specific and express purpose of protesting police conduct, you have no right to do it. Which means, of course, that this picture is illegal. So is this one, and this one, and this one. Now, based on the ruling, interestingly, it appears that only police are entitled to this version of "don't look at me," and of course the police are entirely free to film you, and in fact to do more. As one writer put it, we are now, quoting, a society where police are protected if they shoot you with guns, but you are not protected if you shoot them with a camera. Okay, but at that point, this is moving from clownish to outrageous, so what's our next option? Well, it seems that in Idaho, the Education Committee of the state Senate has produced a bill to get that old-time religion out of the churches and back in the schools where it belongs. Senate Bill 1232 declares that the Bible, and it doesn't actually say what version of the Bible, but I expect they just knew that they meant that good old Protestant one, not that dumb old Catholic version. But anyway, the bill says that the Bible, and I'm quoting, is expressly permitted to be used in Idaho public schools for reference purposes to further the study of literature, comparative religion, English and foreign languages, United States and world history, comparative government, law, philosophy, ethics, astronomy, biology, geology, world geography, archaeology, music, sociology, and other topics of study where an understanding of the Bible may be useful or relevant. It adds in one of those, this way we can't get sued provisions, that no student will have to use any religious text if they or their parents object. But what I really want to know is how the Bible is going to be useful or relevant in the study of, for example, astronomy. Maybe they can include the part about how Joshua prayed for the sun to stand still, and it did. Now, as a footnote, this same bill repealed an earlier 1963 version of the law, which had required daily Bible readings of state-approved passages in every classroom. Okay, what could top that? Believe it or not, I have someone. So the big red nose this week goes to right-wing attorney and self-described no fan of government, Kory Langhofer, who said on Phoenix TV station KPNX on February 21st that Justice Antonin Skeletor's votes in cases now pending before the Supreme Court should still count, even though he died before the court issued its ruling or took its final vote. There's no Ouija board required to figure out how Justice Scalia would vote on these things, he said. We know exactly what he thought, and it's not unprincipled to say we should give effect to that. Now, just to be clear, in case you're wondering if you heard right, because you did hear right, Langhofer is proposing that Skeletor still get a vote on pending Supreme Court cases despite laboring under the handicap of being dead, as deceased as Monty Python's parrot. Kory Langhofer, who, by the way, was a lawyer for Mitt Romney's 2012 campaign, and if this is the quality of his thinking, I wonder if maybe he was responsible for the line, corporations are people, my friend. But Kory Langhofer, truly a championship-level clown. All right, last for this week is our other regular feature. This is the outrage of the week. And this, in a way, refers back to what I was talking about earlier, both about the knee-jerk Islamophobia that doomed Al Jazeera America from the start, and about our lovely little wars taking place exclusively in majority Muslim nations. In 2011, the Air Force Research Laboratory released a report titled Countering Violent Extremism, Scientific Methods and Strategies. It was reissued this past summer, and the revised edition became available online in January. A preface says, "The wisdom contained in this paper collection is more relevant than ever." Now, many of the articles are written by academics and researchers in the field of counterterrorism, but one, titled A Strategic Plan to Defeat Radical Islam, written by a self-described former Islamic extremist, contains what one observer called a number of bizarre prescriptions for how to defeat terrorism, few of which appear to be supported by any empirical evidence. It was written by Tawfiq Hamid, a professor, a fellow at the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. One of his assertions is that militancy is primarily a product of sexual deprivation, but more crudely, people turn extremists because they don't get laid enough. Now that's strange enough, and I can't help but wonder if Dr. Hamid is generalizing from his own experience, but it's not the only thing to make you just blink in wonder. Another claim is that our problem with our poor reputation among Muslim nations is not due to our policies, but due to a lack of good PR. So I suppose if we painted smiley faces on our bombs, people wouldn't have such trouble about getting blown up. And he argues that we shouldn't worry too much about killing innocent civilians in our bombing runs because, quoting him, "In war as in medicine, good cells die when we treat bad ones, and so it's unfair to blame the doctor for killing good cells." But the part that struck me oddest was his assertion that wearing a hijab, the traditional headscarf worn by Muslim women, is a form of passive terrorism, whatever the hell that means, and represents an implicit refusal to speak against or resist terrorism. In other words, wearing a hijab, and basically you're an accessory after the fact. Okay, so the guy's a flake. Why the outrage? Because again, this spluttering concoction of Islamophobic bilgewater, undeserving of publication as any sort of research, is in an official report that is intended to help government agencies formulate anti-terrorism programs. A report whose preface praises Hamad as offering a soup-to-nuts strategic plan for combating radicalism. In other words, it is something that appears to be, in the words of one scholar, nothing more than an attempt to supply national security agencies with bogus surveillance rubrics that are being taken seriously by our government. That is frightening, and it is an outrage. All right, that's it for this week. We're going to get out of here. Glad to be back after my week off, but we'll get to it, and got a lot of stuff to cover in the weeks to come. A couple of particular things I didn't get to, but I'm going to make a special effort to cover them next week. But for now, as always, you just have the best week you possibly can, and peace.